Midnight had the kind of darkness that swallows sound. A two-lane highway ran like a vein through low hills. Headlights stitched a silver seam across tar and concrete as truck after truck crawled south. This was no ordinary convoy. Painted emblems told the story. Chinese logistics markings on the trailers, escort vehicles with reinforced plating, satellite comms buzzing with routine checks. Men sipped tea and argued about weather. A colonel in the lead read the manifest one last time. 62 vehicles, 420 personnel. Value, estimated $24 million. Confidence hummed in the radio. Route secured. S-400 coverage nominal 203. Above the valley, the night looked calm. But the sky keeps its ledger, and the ledger had a line that night most did not expect. 300 pale lights, slow at first, then purposeful. They moved like a flock with intent. Not the roar of jets, not the flash of cruise missiles, but a buzzing, relentless geometry. To anyone watching them on a feed, they looked small and insignificant. To the men on the road, they became a promise. Inside a makeshift command room 12 kilometers away, a warehouse converted into a hub of patched monitors and breathing people, they watched with something like reverence. Ukrainian engineers, an ex-aircraft mechanic, a pair of university robotics students. They called themselves by nicknames, not ranks. On the wall, a chalkboard read, "No manuals, no spectacle, only message." They argued, not about how to strike, but whether the world should see what they had to show. In the end, with hands that shook for reasons other than fear, they agreed the switch would be flipped. 2:17. In the convoy's lead truck, a driver yawned. A nav operator scrolled through the same satellite overlay that had comforted them earlier. The S-400 layer was active to the east. Mobile ZSU-23-4 Shilka units and truck-mounted anti-air guns were assigned as escort. Tension and routine shared a cigarette. Then the first faint hum threaded the night, as if summer insects had decided to migrate in synchrony. Heads turned up. Curiosity first, then the cold caveat every soldier knows. Attention. 2:20. The first strike did not explode a mountain. It set a crate on fire, a quiet ember that ate at bundled cable and fuel lines until the black night lit like a small dawn. The convoy's standard formation, 100 meters between heavy trucks, armored escorts spaced to reduce catastrophic chain reactions, became a map of human vulnerability. Radios crackled. Contact! Unidentified aerial searchlights sketched the sky. Gatling barrels began to spin. But these were not missiles. They were hundreds of small aircraft, each seemingly inconsequential, each moving with the patience of something that understands fragility. In the warehouse, someone whispered a prayer. The screen showed burning tarpaulin, men thrown clear by blast, a satellite image blinking. No one cheered. They watched like surgeons after a procedure, full of professional distance and private grief. What followed in those next terrible minutes would be recorded in shaky phone footage, satellite slides, and the memory of those who survived. A highway turned to a river of flame. A line of steel transformed into blackened frames. 2:23. The sound grew into a mechanical thunder. 300 propellers made an unnatural chorus. The convoy's armored escorts spun to life. ZSU-23-4 Shilka cannons fired, tracers arced, machine guns spat lead into the dark. For a moment it looked like the ritual would hold. A handful of the incoming machines crumpled, falling in small, smoking pieces. Soldiers cheered, relief flickering across faces. But the swarm did not collapse. It adapted. They called it a storm that thought. The drones split into waves. Some acted as decoys, shimmering and drawing fire. Others slipped low like wasps, skimming guardrails and diving between tail lights. A pallet of precision components in a covered trailer detonated. The blast sent a shock through the convoy that snapped radios and ruptured fuel lines. A BM-21 Grad mounted on a flatbed was surrounded by flame. Its rockets, useless in their tubes, became a tomb. Diesel ignited in sheets, turning stretches of highway into molten rivers. Soldiers who had trained under doctrine found themselves unprepared for an enemy that used size and numbers instead of mass. 0229, Commanders called for S-400 lock for electronic countermeasures, for reinforcements. The names flew across encrypted channels: S-400, Tor system, mobile EW elements, heavy, expensive, layered. Yet systems built to knock down jets and cruise missiles struggled against 100 small, agile signatures. Optical trackers flagged targets, but the sheer density of contacts overloaded the oldest doctrines. Anti-aircraft crews labored, overworked and brave. A ZSU crew shot down a dozen, then 3 hit the vehicle in return, blowing its turret 10 meters into the air. Men were thrown like rag dolls. Screams and the ricochet of metal threaded the air. In the warehouse, someone replayed a live feed. A drone plunging into a fuel drum, igniting a wall of fire that consumed 3 trucks in a heartbeat. The visual was cinematic, obscene, almost impossible to look away from. Yet for those who planned it, the point was not theater but arithmetic. Limiting supply, imposing cost. But the arithmetic had flesh. Bodies lay under frames, boots visible among buckled steel. A medic pulled open a shirt and found scorched uniform, letters half obscured, a name left forever unknown in the smoke. 2:35. Within 10 minutes, the highway had been transformed. 40 vehicles burned, casualties mounted. A machine gun vehicle that had shot down 20 drones was itself hit. The crew's shout cut off mid-call. Radio silence became the new signal. Satellite feeds later would show heat signatures and smoke plumes. Phone clips would show faces frozen in shock. Analysts would later call it an efficiency ratio never before seen. Small investment producing massive effect. But on the ground, there were only shoes, a crushed thermos, the smell of diesel, and men trying to count the living. 2:42. The swarm was not flawless. Some drones fell harmlessly into fields, some were shot down. Still, when 300 small devices can generate disruption in the face of systems like S-400 and Shilka, doctrine is forced to ask a question it had not had to ask. What happens when mass moves in numbers rather than mass? The convoy had been armored against old answers. The new question arrived not as a missile, but as a buzzing wave. 0310. Dawn did not soften the horror, it revealed it. Blackened frames lined the roadside like fossilized beasts. Smoke columns rose and pooled in the cold air. Satellite imagery disseminated by open sources confirmed what locals already knew. A major logistics column had been devastated. Official statements were immediate and absolute. Beijing called it an unprovoked attack on sovereign supply operations and demanded accountability. Kiev's spokespeople avoided direct admission, speaking in phrases of asymmetric pressure and responses to escalation. International organizations urged restraint. Diplomats convened emergency briefings. On social platforms, the footage became a spectacle and a political torch. Clips of burning trailers and screaming engines circulated with headlines that promised shock. 300 Ukrainian drones ambush Chinese convoy. What happened next? Will shock you comment sections filled with competing narratives. Some users praised ingenuity and resistance. Others denounced lawlessness and the end of rules. Analysts argued over hardware lists, which anti-air systems failed, whether Tor or S-400 had adequate queuing, whether the convoy's spacing had been doctrinally correct. Think tanks published infographics, numbers, dollar values, hypothetical replacement costs, a brutal translation of human loss into spreadsheets. In towns nearby, human stories emerged. A mother received a text that the truck her son drove had been at the convoy's rear. She watched looping videos, hoping for a name, a sign, a living eye. A mechanic who had once repaired truck axles walked along the scorched asphalt and touched a warped metal panel as if greeting an old friend. Volunteers gathered supplies, medics worked with what they had. At a makeshift triage, a young soldier clutched a photograph and asked if anyone could deliver it home. The photograph slipped from fingers darkened by soot. Meanwhile, the international arms market stirred. Manufacturers promised counter-drone packages that were faster, smarter, and more costly than the devices that had caused the panic. Investors recalibrated risk. Policy halls spoke of norms and the need for regulation of unmanned systems. Lawyers asked whether existing laws of armed conflict adequately address swarm attacks and dual-use components. The tragedy had become an accelerant for policy and procurement decisions. In Silo Room, the planners wrestled with optics and ethics. Some argued the strike had been necessary to choke a supply line they claimed fed atrocities. Others feared the precedent they had set. One of the students scrolled through comments praising them as heroes. He closed the laptop and walked outside, the dawn burning the sleep from his eyes. He stood for a long time, listening to distant sirens, trying to count in his head the faces he had seen on the screens the night before. There was no joy in victory, only the heavy weight of consequence. Weeks later, the valley still smelled of smoke in the mornings. Investigations traced hardware fragments to civilian supply chains and foreign vendors. Serial numbers on motors hinted at global commerce, a reminder that modern conflict borrows from everyday life. Diplomatic notes passed between capitals. Beijing warned of protections for overseas logistics. Kiev framed its posture as defensive. Neutral states worried about escalation and contagion. Public debate hardened into a posture. Some argued that the ambush marked a new era, where cheap technology could erode the deterrent value of billion-dollar systems like the S-400. Others warned of a darker conclusion. If every logistics train could be threatened by inexpensive swarms, civilian commerce and humanitarian supply lines might become perpetually militarized. Universities ran seminars on ethics. Parliaments took testimony. Security conferences featured panels titled Swarm Warfare and the Future of Logistics. Business owners in ports and corridors met with risk consultants. At the human level, the stitchwork of grief continued. A widow placed a chipped cup at the roadside where a trailer once burned. A father read a list of names released weeks later and recognized the handwriting on a manifest as his brother's. A child in a distant city watched a clip and asked a single devastating question: did they deserve this? The answer was not a policy paper, but the slow, complicated calculus of politics and pain. The operators in the grain silo room tried to write a statement. It started as an argument and became an apology, and then a plea for context, for memory, for conversation rather than imitation. They did not seek to glorify destruction. They wanted to show a world that logistics mattered, that supply chains were nodes of power, and that small ingenuity could change the balance. But they also understood that the photograph of burning trucks could be copied, and that images spread faster than nuance. Months after the night, new measures were announced across regions: hardened escorts, revised spacing doctrine, investment in active counter-UAS systems, and improved sensor fusion. Each new layer added cost and complexity. Each new expense tested the economies of states and the patience of citizens. The strategic calculus shifted. Where once mass protected movement, now adaptability and distribution mattered more. In the end, history recorded the valley as a hinge. Some historians called it a turning point in asymmetric engagements. Others filed it among the tragedies of a wider conflict. Survivors told stories in kitchen light. Analysts argued in op-eds. The theater of war had changed its terms. Cheap devices, digital networks, and public platforms meant that a small act could become a global conversation overnight.